We'll now hear from Professor Charlesworth, drawing some concluding statements, and we'll bring the panel up, and everyone will be able to draw some of this together. And I hope they'll all have something to say about how this kind of work about temple material is being received in the academic world in general. Several of the things that have been said obviously run contrary to the received wisdom of 30 or even 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. So how are we in terms of getting people on board with all of this, Jim, and other things you might want to say?
I was told to look at the agenda, and it said, now we're having concluding comments by James Charlesworth. Well, I wish he would show up and conclude. But it says panel responses and audience questions. Consensus. The panel has agreed that the temple was so important for early Jews, number one. Second, the temple was the only place where Jews were told to make 3 annual pilgrimages. 3, the temple was a place of wealth for art, architecture, and money. 4th, Jesus centered his Judean ministry in the temple, and we know he taught in the Solomon portico, which is the one on the eastern wall. 5th, we know that Jesus worshiped in the temple and conceivably offered sacrifices. 6, many leaders in Jerusalem and the temple respected Jesus. Some admired him, and a few agreed with him. So far, we haven't mentioned Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. The usual explanation is they're members of the Sanhedrin, and they loved Jesus to the point that they were willing to miss the time in the temple to celebrate Passover. If they were near his corpse, controlled the burial, put any kind of ointment on him, they could not be in public, let alone the temple, for 7 days. I added that. 7, priests and Jesus admired each other. 8, that would be a shock to The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson. But he got a lot of things wrong. 7, 8, Jesus' followers worshipped in the temple. Paul centered a lot of his comments in the temple. Obviously, he's in the temple a lot. Obviously, he believed and claimed to have experienced a resurrected Jesus. And James, Jesus' brother, worshipped in the temple until they threw him off the pinnacle of the temple in the 60s. 9th, the Psalter was the hymn book of the Second Temple. 10, well, I want to go to 11 and come back to 10. Because I made I do 5, 7, 10, and I finished 10, and I thought, oh, there's an 11th. 11th, the birth of Mary appeared in a world that is anti-Jewish, anti-priest, but is pro-temple. There are dimensions of this work, but must not be overlooked. Now back to 10. We work in the dung heaps of antiquity. You may know what you had dinner the night before if you have leftovers, but that's not what I mean by leftovers. We have no idea. We have some things left over. In fact, I really would like to make that point very strongly. In a conference, I asked one of the distinguished Qumranologists, what % of the documents put in the caves do we have? He said 70%, and everybody agreed. I think it's less than 3%. They say, well, we have 7 documents from Cave 7. What about the 70 little, we have thousands of fragments, and what about the 70 other documents we think are in Cave 7? What was in caves 7, 8, 9, and 10? Very little we know about. What about the caves that have no numbers, but we know they're there? There are at least 5 caves I know of, but they collapsed in antiquity. What about cave 4? Over 100,000 little fragments. One fragment of a 30 long scroll. So that's what I mean. We work with leftovers. One of the absurd things is scholars say we know Esther, or it's Esther, right? Esther was not at Qumran. That's absurd. We have bushels full of fragments unidentified. We have a document we think is based upon a commentary. All you can say is, as of the present, scholars have not been identifying a fragment that we can say is part of Esther. That's a very different statement. Now, there's another statement people make that is also equally absurd. No fragments were found in the Qumran ruins. No one can say that. You can only say that archaeologists report they were told that no fragments were found in the ruins. I'm one of the few people that spend hours and days and months and years, indeed decades, working with Bedouin, and it's been for 40 years, and they say, of course we did. We found a lot of them. Now, let me explain to you that either you ignore that or you think that it's possible. In those days, when I paid Bedouin, that was much later, not in 52 or 53 or 54. It was in 68, long later. We paid him $1.75 a day. All right, you are a Bedouin. You are hired to dig. You find something. You know it's worth $500. You're a paterfamilias. That means you must put food on the table. You found it. Put it in your garment, and the garments are very big. You know, they're not tight-fitting clothes. And you bring it to Kondo, and you get your $500. Did you do something bad? Did you lie? Well, remember, lying is bad for Christians and Jews, but not for some others. So that's just what I mean by leftovers, okay? Leftovers. In fact, I'm absolutely convinced there's a huge scroll that was found in Cave 4, and I've been looking for it for 30 years, and I almost found it. So that's the end of that. Turning Lee Levine's comment, we are exploring islands of whispers in a sea of silence. Don't ask us to answer any more questions. Yeah, let's get out of here.
All right. Well, I think we have been very well treated to.
See if anybody agrees with anything I said on the panel.
Oh, well.
The scholars are paid lots of money, I heard.
Yeah, $1.75 a day.
And they're trained to disagree. I disagree.
Well, sure. Would anyone on the panel like to draw some concluding comments about your work? Why you think it's promising? Why do we do this? What can people hope for coming out of an emphasis on temple studies that will benefit scholarship in general?
Just a small remark. First of all, I told you, I think that the great things are still ahead of us, not behind us. I'm quite sure that every time we get new things. But there's one thing which I thought about when we heard Jerry speaking about. I attribute a lot of importance to the Mishnah's description of the temple, which I think is very, very important, because it gives us the key to study the Old and New, not the Old, but the New Testament in the time, let's say, at the time of Jesus in the temple. And the reason is very simple. You were deliberating why the Mishnah, which was compiled in 200 AD, which actually there are tractates which are 200 BC. By the way, now I tell you a joke. I'm using BC and AD because I'm used for so many years. You know that the Jewish people usually is using BC and BCE, which is more complicated. The joke is that the Jewish professor in the United States, he used to say, as I do, BC and AD. So people told him, listen, it's not fitting a Jewish person to say. He says, what's wrong with that? BC is before Christianity. It's true, that BC is before Christianity. And AD is after that. Now, the thing is, and this is very important, that I refer to the Mishnah as a legal document because to this very day the Jewish world is using the Mishnah, the halachot of the Mishnah, the laws of the Mishnah. This is a book of law. When it refers to the temple, for us the temple is maybe spiritual thing. For the Mishnah, it's a legal document. When they write that you're not supposed to do something in the Temple Mount or in the temple, first of all, when you buy a house, it says, I'm buying a house. The limits of the house are from the right is this, from the left is that, behind is this, and in front is that. You have to define the place. The Mishnah, when it says that it is 600 cubits, 500 cubits, or 500 cubits, it is a legal document. No matter what will be added later, if heaven adds or whatever happens, no matter what happens, it is always the 500 cubits and 500 cubits. And when I collect all the documents to create a legal book, I will always create the old one where the law refers to and the size of the temple which is referred to as a legal book. And that is why they took 100 years before tractates and they put it after the temple was already destroyed. I don't know if you know, the description of the Mishnah of the temple was written by a certain Rabbi, Elazar ben Yaakov, who lived after the destruction of the temple. But he had enough documents to make the reconstruction, and there is one very interesting thing. When he described the chambers in the women's court, he says, this one we used for this one was for use, this one was for this I don't remember what it was used for. He says it clearly. Yes, why? Because the temple did not exist anymore. So it's also very important to say, but still they adhered to the laws of the dimensions, legal dimensions of the temple. This is a very important fact, and this may explain what you have said.
Okay. Yes. George, if you'll come up, and on these final comments and recommendations or encouragement for people, if the panelists will come up to this microphone, that will work a lot better for the recording. So.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to cap off my lecture by saying that I have inadvertently stumbled upon what looks like a window into very early Christianity, possibly pre-70 Christianity. And it's a Christianity that is so Jewish-based, where the priests and the high priests are the good guys. And Mary and Jesus are born within an environment of wealth and opulence, and that they are basically aristocratic. They're an aristocratic family. Jesus has aristocratic priestly roots, which is something that even in the New Testament it's questionable, because you have the genealogies in Matthew and Luke, and both of those are really Joseph's genealogies. They're not Mary's genealogies. And then these same two gospel writers tell you Jesus was born of a virgin. So there's an underlying unease with Jesus's background. And I think this is just a possible, like I said, a window into a world that has pretty much the window has been shut by the development of Christianity and its appreciation of who Jesus was and who Mary was and what Jesus's roots were.
Professor Zervos, I want to push you on Ode 19. When you no, there's no. This is fun. This is no pressure.
I feel like I'm back in a graduate seminar.
When you were looking into Genesis Maria, you said there was no pain in the birth. In Ode of 19, which I date between 100, closer to 100 than a 125, I think it's closer to 100. And one of the reasons is I have absolutely no doubt, and I'll be making that point clearer on Wednesday, that the author had been an Essene. So he can't be too much later than 68 when the Essenes disappeared. So it's an early document, and I think there's a consensus on that. The argument is the latest possible date is, but that's like saying the latest possible date for John is about the 3rd century, because finally you have the adulterate pericope, 753 through 733 to 811 added. Now, if Ode of Solomon said she bore without pain, Ode of Solomon 19, like a strong and powerful man. So she had pop, there was the baby. So there is a tradition. And so my question, there's a tradition that I know is very early, that the virgin conceived and bore without pain.
Right.
It clearly is Mary. It is clearly a virgin. It doesn't have the virginity postpartum. And without pain, I see the tradition connected. Am I totally wrong again?
Let me just say that part of the Genesis of Mary, as I guess you'd say the Holy Family, Joseph, Mary, Joseph's other children, sons and daughters, were making their way to Bethlehem, basically. They never got there because as they were, on the road traveling, they're about 3 miles outside of Bethlehem, which is really strange for an early Christian document to say Jesus wasn't born in Bethlehem to begin with. But Joseph turns around and sees Mary, and she's very happy. And then he turns around and sees her, and she's distraught. And he says, "What's going on? Why are you?" Well, I mean, she's, getting ready to go into labor, I guess, but there isn't any labor. Her answer is not that, well, I'm going into labor. Her answer is that I'm thinking of two peoples. One happy people and one sad people. And of course, this is referring to the pre-Jesus, pre-Christian peoples versus the post-Jesus, more Christian peoples. But it wasn't because she was feeling pain. So that might be a...
Now, I want to inform you of something, and you have a rare opportunity. I'm chairing an Isaiah conference in the Mormon Center this August, and there's still room. And it's to test my thesis that there's a continuity of Isaiah that no one has seen. So it's the Charlesworth consensus. So we've asked the leading scholars on first Isaiah, that's 8th century, second Isaiah, that's 6th century, third Isaiah, that's 4th century, Isaiah at Qumran, which is 2nd and 1st century, the world specialist on John the Baptizer and Jesus, and then I do the Gospels, and then we have someone, Isaiah in the Midrashim and the Mishnah, and then finally we have a scholar who would be talking about the importance of Isaiah in the liturgy of the Jewish community and the Christian community. That is and so we have the leading scholars speaking. If you want to go, this shows you how you do it. If you want to then join a tour, this shows you how to do that. Now, this is not a cheap tour, but if you want to buy a cheap car without wheels, that's one thing. I've taken a lot of people in. Sometimes I take 350 people in, and every day we're going to the hospitals for 1 hour. I'm taking you only to the very best hotels, some which you cannot even make a reservation in ever. And the leading archaeologists Dan Bahat will be speaking to us, showing us Jerusalem. He will literally take you into the parts of Jerusalem. I think, Dan, it's the wrong day. You and I changed the day, but we can talk on that. But Dan, for example, he will take us in and show us what even archaeologists do not know. Then we have Shimon Gibson, who is digging near the house of Caiaphas, and he will break in because he has a key, so it's not breaking in. But he will take us down into the excavations. At Migdal, we will show you a first century synagogue in which Jesus clearly taught, and most likely where he met Mary. And we'll go to Capernaum. But it's very easy to do. You can put in your money, and even a month from now, take your money out. It's low risk. But take one only if you're going to go. Because it costs too much money to make these. But it's a rare opportunity. I don't really do this unless I have a group that, and it's at the Mormon Center. You can even add on a trip. We're going to go into Petra if you're interested. That's an add-on.
I don't know if this is the final comment, but I'll pretend it's number 10, not number 11, and make it the final comment. I just wanted to personally, again, I'm sure I speak on behalf of Dan and George as well, of thanking Jack Welch and the entire BYU community for hosting us. It's just been absolutely wonderful to be here. And a special word to Jim Charlesworth. Our institutions are located only about 15 miles from one another, so I get to see Jim regularly in New Jersey. When he says he lives in his office, he was talking about himself, actually, not about other scholars, perhaps. Okay, Jim, on a very serious note, who was, along with Professor Welch, one of the moving forces for today and tomorrow in Logan, is simply a treasure. I just want to say that. I'll speak now personally as a Jew. Jim has done so much to bring Christians and Jews together over his long and distinguished career. What can I say? The world is a better place because of the Jim Charlesworths of this world and the Jim Charlesworth of this room. Thank you, Jim.
Well, there are many more things we could say, but I think it's time for us to draw this to a conclusion and thank our panel for being with us and all that they have brought to us, and some plain and holy things that we have learned that maybe have fallen by the wayside that can be restored through research like this on the temple. I'm very grateful to all of you for being here. When we as Latter-day Saints say goodbye to people, we have a hymn that we sing. Now, it's not Psalm number 134, which the priest would sing as the pilgrims left the temple. But I'm wondering if everyone would stand and sing with us one verse of God be with you till we meet again. God be with you till we meet again. His counsels guide uphold you. With his sheep securely fold you. God be with you till we meet again. Till we meet, till we meet, till we meet at Jesus' feet. Till we meet, till we meet. God be with you till we meet again.
An old Methodist hymn.
That's good for us all. Thanks very much.